Direwolves are back, or are they? There's a biotechnology company called Colossal that is attempting to de-extinct various animals, and they have just claimed that they have de-extincted their first animal, not just their first animal, the first animal to ever be de-extincted. And that claim does not, in my opinion, hold up to scrutiny. However, there are a number of truly remarkable things that are part of this announcement that allow me to still be excited about it, despite the fact that I think they're saying some stuff that they shouldn't say. So this video is the good, the bad, and the straight up wrong of this announcement. And the realization that we are all going to come to in the end here is that what was done is in some ways more remarkable, but also almost certainly more scary than de-extinction. Because if you could say that a species was created here, it is a species that has never existed before. This is not bringing a species back. This is the wholesale creation of a new species by humans, of large mammal. And that is indeed new. But there's so much here that I feel like the way to get through it all is to just watch the video that announced this, and I'm going to react to little pieces of it, bit by bit.
Everyone likes to talk about the climate crisis, but we are actually in a biodiversity crisis.
So I don't know that everybody does like to talk about the climate crisis, but I do think that it is right to say that we are in these twin crises of biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis that, of course, intersect with each other. The climate crisis has huge impacts on biodiversity, but I think a lot of people might think that it's the biggest factor in it, and it's not. The biggest factor in the biodiversity crisis, human use of habitat, basically. So like encroachment on a habitat, poaching, that kind of stuff. Is this the right way to take on the biodiversity crisis? Is the problem that no one is de-extincting animals? No. Like, I don't think that this guy would say that the problem is no one is de-extincting animals. The problem is that humans continue to encroach on more and more habitat every year. We're doing it slower than we used to, especially per capita, but we're still doing it.
Some scientists have estimated that by 2050, half of all species that are alive today will be extinct.
So 2050 is 25 years away. I don't know that any scientists have made this claim. It would be really weird to me if they had, but I'm gonna Google it. So here it is. Biologists think 50% of species will be facing extinction by the end of the century. Currently, 1 in 10 are facing extinction. So that's not extinct. That's in danger of becoming extinct. And I can believe that. And I could see how that stat could get translated in conversations to half of species alive today will be extinct by 2050. And please do not take this as me saying that this isn't a problem and we don't need to face it. Obviously, we need to face it. It's just a fact that I wanted to check because it seemed off to me, and indeed it is off, but like, whatever. Is this the world's first de-extinction? No. I don't see any reason why these animals would not be considered gray wolves. They are genetically modified gray wolves. If you would consider them a separate species, then you would have to consider them a synthetic species, and you would not consider them to be a species or even a relative, really, of direwolves. But whatever.
People think it's a scary word, de-extinction. They immediately put us with Jurassic Park, and it's not.
In the circles I travel in, de-extinction isn't scary because of Jurassic Park. It's scary because, like, we're trying to figure out how to do ecosystems, and the ecosystems are very flexible and mobile, and when something comes out of an ecosystem, that can cause problems, and trying to put it back in once it's been gone for a long time can also cause problems. I'm not actually personally opposed to the idea of de-extinction. I know lots of people who are. But I think that it's an active conversation that we're not going to have right now. But like, it's not because people think that like Newman from Seinfeld's going to get eaten by a dinosaur.
As we lose species within an ecosystem, if you think of a Jenga puzzle, you're sort of pulling blocks out of there. Those blocks that are creating the instability in the ecosystem is literally the function that animal plays. If we can find ways to restore animals that provide that specific function, we can create more stability within an ecosystem.
So this is the argument that Colossal makes, that they have de-extincted a direwolf. This is a cogent argument that I just don't think is a good argument to make using the word de-extinction. I think using the word de-extinction is really about marketing in this case. And also it's not about direwolves because we're not going to put direwolves back in an ecosystem that would benefit from them because that ecosystem died out tens of thousands of years ago. So like very few of the animals that direwolves would prey on still exist, for example. But the argument that they're making that this is de-extinction is that we have these Jenga blocks and we're pulling blocks out. And if you can slide another block in there, then the ecosystem won't collapse as long as it fills that same niche, as long as it fits into that Jenga block spot. And it's not just like every block is the same size. There's lots of all different sizes of Jenga blocks that are all moving around and all evolving to exist with each other. This is an okay metaphor, actually. Imagine a Jenga tower that's made out of millions of blocks that are constantly moving and responding to each other. And if you take out a big one, there will not be time for the blocks to react to each other and the ecosystem may collapse. And so you want to slot one in real quick. And in that case, what you could do is you wouldn't have to grab the existing animal that went extinct. You could create an animal that serves that same niche, that is close enough to that blob that you can plop it in there and then the ecosystem will recover. And that's why they're making the case that these wolves are a de-extinction, because theoretically they might be direwolf shaped enough that they would slot into the direwolf-shaped hole left behind by the actual direwolves that went extinct. Now, I am going to explain why these aren't direwolves. I can't just say that. I know that. It's just that we haven't reached that point in the video yet. Now, I wouldn't say that slotting in a different species into a niche is de-extinction. I do understand how it could be a functional good in ecosystem ecology. But it also sounds very hard. And also, all of the other Jenga blocks around it are going to react differently to that block that you just slotted in than they would to the original species. And you will not, in that case, have made extinction a thing of the past. That extinction will still have happened. I think that 50, 100 years from now, there's going to be a lot more habitat available on this earth for wilderness. And I think that these conversations probably will have had value at that point, because there will be ecosystem engineering going on. And part of that is going to be genetic modification and species engineering and synthetic species. And we're having those conversations now because we're going to have to figure it out then, and we're going to be fighting about it the whole time, I promise you. So in this section of the video, we're going to talk about wolves in Yellowstone National Park. And I think that this is weird because it makes you think that the genetically modified wolves that they have created are going to be part of a project like this, but they aren't going to be, and they should not be, and they shouldn't be released into the wild, because the niche that they would have filled in the former Pleistocene Americas does not exist anymore. You would not want dire wolves walking around in the wild, because there's no food for them. But the utility here, there is utility here. One is potential economic utility of having a little theme park. But number two is proof of concept for technologies. And we're going to get to those technologies, but this has nothing to do with that, because we're talking about wolves, but these wolves are not going to be reintroduced to the wild, and there is no niche for them. Because all the food that they ate is extinct. It has been for thousands of years.
We thought if we could use it as an opportunity where we can also develop technologies that can help wolves, we thought it was the right first project, given how important wolves are to ecosystems.
Now, you can make the case that it's important to do this with wolves because wolves are important to ecosystems, and there are other wolves that are weirdly not mentioned in this video that can potentially benefit from some of the research being done here, and are. Like, it's weird that this isn't mentioned in this video, but Colossal has also cloned red wolf coyote hybrids with the intent of having a species to fill that niche in America, in the United States, in places where there were once red wolves and there no longer are. We've done stuff like that. Like, we've done it with Przewalski's horse, where we, had a Przewalski's horse you basically have the embryo of a Przewalski's horse implanted into a domestic horse. And now we have more Przewalski's horses in the world, and that's good, because that's a natural species of horse that should be in their ecosystem. There's niches for them to exist inside of because they are very recently have left those niches. And predators and wolves are very important to ecosystems, and doing this work with red wolves could potentially have benefit. I just don't know why it's not mentioned in this video. You haven't heard about it. You haven't heard that Colossal cloned red wolves as part of this. I don't know why not.
One of the challenges when we started working on the direwolf was that we knew of only 2 direwolf specimens in the world that contained some usable DNA.
All right. Now, this is like a legitimately cool, I'm excited about it part of the thing where they found enough direwolf DNA. And it wasn't just them. Like, I think that there are researchers who work with Colossal and are on this research, but then there are people who are just at Colossal or just on this research or whatever. We've had tons of direwolf skulls from the La Brea tar pits, but because it's a tar pit, all the DNA is super degraded. You're not going to get anything off of those. But we have found a couple of specimens of direwolves. One is, I think, 12,000 years ago. One's like almost 80,000 years old. And we've gotten, I think from the older one, we actually got more DNA. That's a long time ago to get usable DNA, to get not just all of the direwolf genome, but like multiple copies of it so that you can fill in a lot of the gaps. You're not going to get one solid unbroken genome, but you could get multiples so that you could do a bunch of computer analysis and have basically a full direwolf genome. And that's amazing. That's really cool. And there's other cool stuff that they're about to do with that genome that we're going to talk about it too. This video, by the way, is brought to you by our newsletter. It's called We're Here. It goes out every week. It tells you some of the cool stuff that happened on the internet that you could find out by being exposed to a lot of other garbage on whatever social media platform you might be on. But this way, you just get the good stuff distilled out by us and popped over to your email inbox. And we talk about lots of different stuff, but in general, the vibe is, here's some interesting things that people were up to this week, whether that's like the creation of a fun new game or a big change in the way humans are on Earth. Wide-ranging, different perspectives. We do some book reviews there. We have some games we play. It's fun. You could join We Are Here. There's a link in the description. It's free, and you can unsubscribe anytime, and you get it once a week on Friday. And that's how We're Here works. I love it. It is a way for me to experience the social nature of the internet without being on the social internet, which is good. All right, now we're going back into the video here.
There was a massive study that did many samples across multiple institutions.
It was a collaborative effort. I'm glad that they said that. It would have been nice for them to actually name the institutions, because I'm sure that this science was funded by the federal government funding science.
So what you can do is you can map that to its closest living relative. So at Colossal, we're using the gray wolf.
So this is a very interesting moment in the video to me. This woman has said, we're going to map that to its closest living relative. And then the next line is, so Colossal are using the gray wolf. And that indicates to me, like, you would listen to that and think that the gray wolf is the closest living relative of the direwolf. It would seem, looking especially just at the skeletons, that direwolves and gray wolves are closely related to each other. But from our current understanding, a paper published in 2021 that looked at the DNA of direwolves, that isn't just like a little bit wrong, it's like wildly wrong. The paper is called Direwolves Were the Last of an Ancient New World Canid Lineage. There are many authors on this paper, including some people who work at Colossal. And the findings from that paper are that direwolves and gray wolves diverged, like their last common ancestor was almost 6 million years ago. The most recent common ancestor between chimps and humans was between 6 and 7 million years ago. So not that far back, but like close. As much as I love a chimpanzee and sometimes I see a chimpanzee skeleton and I'm like, that's just a little person. They're not. They're different. Very different species. Now, sometimes for a very long time, many traits can be conserved, but that doesn't actually seem to be what happened here. If this was 5 million years ago that this diverged, then that common ancestor gave rise to jackals, African wild dogs, and wolves. And then what would have happened is that they convergently evolved to have very similar body shapes to gray wolves because they were living in a similar habitat and hunting in similar ways. The people at Colossal are just rejecting this wholesale. They're saying this is not the case. Gray wolves are the closest living relative of direwolves. And they say that they have evidence, but they have not provided that evidence, which I find annoying. It also kind of is a big part of your argument here. Like if direwolves are just giant jackals, they're probably gonna look pretty different from gray wolves. And so the thing you've just created in order to try and make it look like a direwolf doesn't actually look like a direwolf. It looks like a large gray wolf. And direwolves would be very different because they diverged and have not shared a common ancestor with gray wolves for 6 million years. But the people at Colossal do have a great direwolf DNA sequence, and so maybe they've done science, and I would love to see them release the science where they talk about how they have proved that there was this old lineage, but then it interbred, which specifically the 2021 paper said there was no gene flow between direwolves and gray wolves, but they are arguing with that, but they are not releasing the data that has led them to argue against that. And I think understandably skeptical of it because it's a better story if the gray wolf is the nearest relative of the direwolf. And this is weird to say a bunch of stuff about a paper before you publish it. What they're saying is that there's this older species that its closest living relative is like jackals, but then that species interbred with gray wolves. And so that makes this, and this is the thing about taxonomy, it's messy. But what they're saying is from the information they have from these two individuals, that there's this old one that was then interbred with a gray wolf 2.5 million years ago, and that is what gave birth to the direwolf species, which is totally possible. That's like a thing that happens. And who is the closest living relative in that situation? It's difficult to say, right? You can tell that they cut out something between when this woman said,
So what you can do is you can map that to its closest living relative.
and then when she says, so at Colossal, we're using the gray wolf. And I think there was something in there that was probably her providing some context. When you're doing what the biologist said earlier, where you're trying to create something that fits into a niche rather than trying to actually de-extinct an animal, that makes sense. But in this case, you're not trying to do either of those things. What you're trying to do is create something that's cool and exciting, and that you can make the case that you're creating this amazing thing. And also you're trying to prove concept of a bunch of different technologies. You're trying to develop a bunch of technologies that are going to be useful in this, which they did do both of those things.
When we edit different lines of genetically diverse gray wolves, we'll create a set of genetically diverse dire wolves with similar edits, but the basis of their diversity already existed within the gray wolf.
So this section is interesting because I don't think it's not explained why it's important, but because they can do this over and over again with different wolves that are genetically diverse, you're not going to end up in a species bottleneck with just like a very small number of dire wolves of these genetically modified wolves. You could potentially be in a situation where there would be plenty of genetic diversity for them to exist on their own. But again, you wouldn't release these into the wild because the niche that you are trying to replace them in doesn't exist.
We've developed a technology where you can take a simple blood draw, isolate these specific cells in the blood, and then clone from it.
So this is the first of two big pieces of science news, and that is that they were able to find specific cells in blood that they can use to create a cell line. So the way that cells work is that you can take them out of a body and grow them in a petri dish for a little while, but then they die. But there are specific cells in the body, stem cells, cancer cells, certain kinds of cells that you can actually create a cell line out of that's immortal, that will last a really long time. So usually in order to find those cells, you'd have to do a pretty invasive tissue sample. But in this case, they figured out how to do it with blood, which is awesome. I don't know if this is their advance, but that's great. This is cool. For sure. It's going to be great for dog cloning. If people want to have their same dog over again, this will make that easier.
We're changing the genome of this living animal partially into the genome of the extinct animal for those genes that matter, for the traits and characteristics that we want to see.
What he's saying here is what traits and characteristics do we want to see in the animal? We're going to pick genes that affect those. And this is another cool part of what Colossal is doing, which is not just taking a genome and being like, okay, we have to get this whole genome into this other animal, but saying, okay, what things actually code for traits, grabbing those and putting them in the wolves. And that's difficult work to do. And requires a lot of knowledge that is relatively new. Even in humans, this would be hard to do. And we have a lot more information about human genomes than we do about wolf genomes.
Discovering which parts of the genome make an animal look and act like that animal is one of the hardest problems in biology. It is unsolved and something that we have to solve if we want to know which parts of the genome we want to edit to make a gray wolf more like a dire wolf.
She said it here, make a gray wolf look more like a dire wolf. That's what they're actually doing. So good on her.
To analyze our genomes, to compare dire wolves with gray wolf genomes, we use our tools on a platform built by FormBio.
So FormBio is a spin-off company from Colossal, and it is built to try and find the actual genes that are gonna most affect the outcome that they're trying to have. So they're not trying to de-extinct anybody. They're trying to create this blob that fits into the right Jenga spot. And so they want to find the genes that help the blob be the right shape to fit in.
That allowed us to know exactly where the gray wolf differed from the dire wolf. Each time you edit a gene in a cell, you put a lot of stress on that cell because you have to get your gene editing tools in these cells and then these changes are made. So what we do instead is we try to make dozens or hundreds of changes at once. It's called multiplex gene editing.
This is another actually cool thing. So we've got multiplex CRISPR going on here, multiplex gene editing, many sites at the same time. So CRISPR comes in and it like grabs a gene and it swaps it out for something else, or just a segment of code. It doesn't have to be a whole gene, and it swaps it out for something else. And you don't want to do that over and over and over again if you want to make a bunch of changes. And in some cases, you do want to make a bunch of changes because oftentimes a disease is not caused by one single gene. It's caused by several genes interacting in a bad way. And you can swap that one gene and maybe that'll be good. And like that will cure people of certain diseases. Some diseases are like single nucleotide problems. You just need to swip one thing and you're good. You just swip a snip and that you're good. But if you want to do a bunch, say if you want to create an animal that's quite different or genetically modify a crop so that it has a bunch of advantageous traits, like you can, there's ways to do that now, but this would be faster, you know, to be able to modify like 20 different sites in the same moment. Now, you're also going to introduce more chances for problems in that situation. But ultimately, I think it's like a good direction to go in. It is worrying from like the designer babies perspective. Like if we can make a bunch of changes to, and I don't think that, like there's a huge taboo and lots of legal reasons why we can't do this, but like it's getting so easy to do technologically that I do worry that someone, just like that guy in China went rogue and did a little bit of gene editing on babies, it makes me think that like the next time that happens will be more significant and more worrying and be pretty escalatory. It's one thing to have a baby get born who has a lower chance of getting HIV, which is what those edits were about. It's another to have a baby be born who's going to be, you know, never lose their hair, is going to be 6'7", is going to be extra strong, extra smart, all this stuff. That will actually create, I think, probably a lot of discourse that will drive us in an uncertain direction. So, and now this section of the video, they're talking about how to actually get the egg turned into a baby that's going to be born out of a dog. And that's, you know about that. That's how Dolly was made. So we're going to skip over this part.
And with the help of a vet team, we then are able to surgically put this embryo back inside to the surrogate dog.
This isn't discussed in this video, but one thing that I do want to talk about is that, so there were some genes that were that gene in direwolves. From what I understand, they are actually the genes that were in direwolves that were swapped out with the gray wolf gene. But then there were also some genes that they wanted to switch out, but they decided not to because they knew that those genes could be associated with other diseases like blindness or loss of hearing or something. And so they didn't want to mess with those genes. So instead, they made those changes by adding in those traits elsewhere or with other genes that they knew they weren't going to be associated with problems. And I think that's like a responsible, ethical way to handle that. And it all comes back to the fact that they're not trying to create direwolves. They're trying to create something that would be more likely to fit into a direwolf-shaped hole in an ecosystem, which again, does not exist in any current ecosystems because direwolves have been extinct for over 10,000 years.
As well as are pursuing on the science side our own exogenous development team so that one day we won't have to use surrogates.
That's wild. That would be the biggest advance that they're trying to work on, is to be able to have a baby mammal be born without a surrogate. So not, especially this is a placental mammal. Like you could kind of see this with marsupials, but with a placental mammal, how do you have a baby be born without a mother? I guess someday we'll get there, but that's wild.
We're a part of the evolutionary stream of the planet. We're kin to every other species out there.
So this is wild. I took a class from this guy at University of Montana. What I can tell you about Dan, from having taken a class from Dan Flores, is this dude loves wolves. He loves wolves in like a biological and scientific way. He also loves wolves in like a spiritual way.
What we do today is, I think, what the hope for the future is for biodiversity and for nature. And so to be on sort of the ground floor of creating a tool that will be the solution for our biodiversity crisis.
I'm going to complain about using the phrase "the solution to our biodiversity crisis" because, again, the problem is not that we can't de-extinct animals. The problem is that we continue to encroach on habitats of animals and also that the climate is changing. There's going to be many solutions to this problem, and I applaud people for exploring various solutions. A little bit of what sticks in my craw about this is how much of what has been done here was done by publicly funded science and then applied in a new and a novel and like important way. Like over and over again, if you look at the stuff that has gone on here, I made a list. So sequencing ancient DNA, we've been at that for a long time, and that's publicly funded research from universities, funded largely by government grants. We've got the whole direwolf genome creation. That was a big Nature paper that lots of people collaborated in at universities all over the place. Again, publicly funded. CRISPR, publicly funded, and continues to, its advancement continues to be publicly funded. Somatic cell nuclear transfer, publicly funded research in academia. Multiplex gene editing with CRISPR at many different sites all at once. That's also something that was done first in academia and then applied in a different and novel and difficult context by Colossal. The same thing with the ability to derive clonable cells from blood. that's something that was established through publicly funded money in academia and then applied to a new use case by Colossal. Using bioinformatics for trait selection, absolutely something established by academia. And the direwolf reference genome that they're using, and also potentially whatever research they did that is indicating the gray wolf might be a closer ancestor for whatever reason, that's all research that seems to have been done in-house at Colossal. There's nothing here. It's hard to celebrate science when you're constrained by the truth in ways that these people aren't. Obviously, everyone in this video was told that they have to say that direwolves are back. And of course, I feel like a stick in the mud. I feel that part of my job is popularizing science, but a bigger part of my job is saying true things. And so I can't sit here and tell you that direwolves have been de-extincted, when in reality there are a few gray wolves that have been genetically modified to more closely resemble direwolves. In a thoughtful way, but like that's not a direwolf. And what I know is that organisms are extraordinarily complicated. And if you change 20 genes, in the course of actually evolving those 20 changes, a bunch of other stuff's gonna happen that are gonna look like they don't matter, but probably do matter. You know, if you get bigger, you have to have more systems for controlling cancer because you have more cells. So these genetically modified wolves might be much more prone to getting cancer because they gave them the get big gene, but they didn't do all the little subtle tweaks to the rest of the genome that would allow for that genome to happen while keeping the natural lifespan the same length or even longer, as tends to happen with larger organisms. That's not like a thing that's definitely going to happen, just to be clear. But it's an example of like the reality of the complexity of organisms. You can't like put 20 human genes in a chimpanzee and get a human, obviously. So I think it's really cool. But I also think that it's an example of like the trouble you get into when you want science to be privately funded, where you have to be doing things that like excite billionaires. And so you end up in a situation where like maybe there was a better candidate for all of these things, but they also have to have a candidate that's splashy and that makes headlines and that, Peter Jackson can cuddle with a direwolf. And that creates incentives to do weird stuff, like saying that they have a paper that indicates that gray wolves are the closest ancestor to direwolves when that's not the current established understanding of the taxonomy here. But maybe it would be, but the paper didn't come out in time, and so why isn't the paper out? If the paper exists, why can't we see it? Usually you wouldn't talk about the results from a paper a bunch on a subreddit before the paper gets published. And I think that it's important to note that this company has like a $10 billion valuation, so there has to be like a way that the investors expect at some point that money to come back to them. There's a few things that are like really exciting, like applying knowledge in new ways with a large placental mammal, lots of edits leading to viable offspring, a real differently shaped organism in a way that I don't think that you would make the case that this is a new species, but if you did, it's not going to be a direwolf, but it would be a synthetic species. I think contemplating the idea of a synthetic species when you can do multiplex gene editing, we kind of have to do that now, I guess. Like, if you can do multiplex gene editing, we have to wrestle with the reality that we can now probably create synthetic species. Synthetic species are on the table now. And it's not like they were taking gray wolf genes and putting them in gray wolves. Like, these are other genes from other species that they're putting in gray wolves. That's wild. Like, it's amazing. But I think that talking about creating a synthetic species would be way like less exciting for a lot of people. Not just because it's really cool to make a direwolf, but because it's kind of scary to make a synthetic species. Like, it's totally seems probably fine to a lot of folks who are, not thinking about biology and ecology all day long. It probably seems pretty cool to like bring back a species that used to exist, where it would probably feel to a lot of those people a lot less cool to talk about creating a species that has never existed, which is closer to what Colossal just did. And Colossal needs to tell a story that's exciting for the public, exciting for their investors, makes it feel like they're making progress in a way that like making a woolly mouse, which is something that they also did, does not feel exciting. Like, they're incentivized to tell this specific story that I don't think is valuable to tell, and I don't think is accurate. Like, I think that it's not true, which, I don't know. I feel like that's important. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, I think that it would be a good addition to your life. It's called We Are Here, and you can sign up at the link in the description.